As the author of the paper Resilience for Innovation Projects in the Education Sector, I will lead you through the presentation. I have a pedagogical background and have been working professionally with innovation projects in different roles and positions for more than 2 decades, whereof the last 12 years in the framework of my network-based consultancy firm Möwe. The presentation introduces two projects as innovation drivers in the education sector and their specific characteristics. Then the methodology for the paper will be presented with its research questions, a range of theories, and the data collection. The funding of these projects plays a crucial role, and the paper has outlined some of the wicked problems that are stated in this context. It is described how project call owners have tried to counteract these problems. As wicked problems cannot be dissolved by simple manners, the rationales behind the application processes had to be outlined. Here a gap between call owners and applicants was stated. How practitioners react on that is drafted. As a result from all that, a need for resilience and trust for innovation projects have arisen. The findings summarize the overall reflections. For an understanding of projects, I refer to the influential project expert Markus Glowacz from Switzerland. Many others could be mentioned. Glowacz describes projects as temporary initiatives whose goal it is to change something for the better, as the business of change, and as an essential discipline in today's age of frequent disruption, turbulence, and fast-changing messages. Projects often pave the way for broad renewal and adaptation to trends and megatrends in our societies. It is tempting to think projects as trial, like in a laboratory, but no project is an island. They are context-dependent. In education, this means policies and financing in the public sector, alongside with market conditions, megatrends such as the globalization, digitalization, or migration, sudden circumstances, just think of the pandemics, and of course, local organizational changes. There is nothing new about projects, but scientific studies about innovation projects in the education sector are still rare. Often they take place with partnerships across several organizations and even across nations. They can involve different subjects, trades, or educational levels. The project results are typically immaterial: teaching models or methods, new curricula, or strengthened collaboration processes. Briefly said, most of these projects are about human changes, and project management is about change management. Thus, the high complexity of these kind of projects must be underlined. The methodology of the paper is meant to support its purpose: to initiate a discussion of application processes for innovation projects in education. My hope is that the findings will lead to further reflection in this field. It was necessary to outline roughly some of the modern project designs, and I summarized them as the contemporary project approach. I present this approach to demonstrate in the paper that many of the calls refer to an outdated project approach. What this means for application processes is considered through the lens of translation theory. The Danish researcher Obel Messen has helped with the studies of strategy implementation. For you can look at projects as a framework for implementing strategies and practices that are difficult to influence more directly. When the need for looking more deeply at resilience came up, I looked at a Canadian volume on texts about resilience, edited by Michael Unger. A recent paper from Austrian Nachgebauer about resilient project management delivered valuable inspiration. In addition, different approaches to trust have been considered. The data I rely on is collected in my own practice from fully completed projects over 12 years. These data are supplemented with others' data which I had access to. Finally, The method and the findings have been verified by education and project experts during this spring. Really many project experts could have been mentioned here. Those I have used are not representative or more outstanding than so many others, but they all have contributed to rethinking project management to what I overall call a contemporary approach. This approach is not an exclusive selection of methods and tools, but it is an organic sample that further develops ongoing. All in all, the contemporary approach represents a paradigm shift away from the belief in controllability and linear progression to a more systemic thinking. Contemporary project management takes regard to the need for changeability and adaptability already during a project. This includes the interaction with the end users, who in our case are the learners. And the project managers give space for involving their project members in a decisive way for achieving personal ownership and commitment. Because innovation projects in the education sector are mainly about human changes. People mostly do not like to be changed. However, people involve in changes if they make sense for them. The same is true for evaluations. There's a need for considering the impact on target groups in a differentiated way, rather than controlling abstract key performance indicators. I call for formative evaluations and quality assurance of the results, so we all can learn from them. These years, we hear a lot about data-driven management. In education projects, call owners often ask for empirical data as a basis for their assessments. However, empirical data are retrospective by nature, and it can be discussed whether or how historical data can point to decisions for the future of education. In his book, Leading Projects with Data, Glovac has twisted the approach of data-driven management by insisting that it's the people who use the data, interpret them, and make a difference. Thus, it's not data that drive things, people do. For this purpose, Glovac widens the understanding of data and suggests to include human knowledge with experience, intuition, expertise in a knowledge mix with classical data. The data used for this paper belong partly to my own project management profession, partly they are collected from other project managers and from publicly available sources. My own project practice spans over more than 2 decades. Here I only use data from fully completed projects in the period 2011 until 2022. My own data collection is very comprehensive and consists of digital and analog documents. These documents are crucial project materials such as applications, plans, analyses, and budgets, and also documentation such as pictures and video recordings from meetings and interventions, evaluation methods and results, as well as my logbooks about lessons learned. Over the years, the data have been considered, discussed with other experts, and processed to findings. These findings have refined my project management in an ongoing way. It were these data that have initiated my reflections and led to the research questions. Certain problems and frustrations have arisen over the recent years and are well known, but not discussed, in the education sector. Firstly, a lack of sustainability of the project results is apparent, even when successes could be stated. Secondly, it seems that a kind of project industry is coming up, where projects are run mostly for financial reasons. Thirdly, some educational institutions seem to lack capacity and professionalism for applications and project management. This can lead to a certain innovation inequality. These problems and others are often stated by call owners as their trigger for further developing the procedures in their calls for projects. When looking more closely at the problems, they appear with a high complexity and a lack of clarity, and thus a wickedness that cannot be dissolved easily. Researcher Riddle recommends to examine the rationales behind wicked problems for a better or worse solution, rather than a true or false solution, which is not possible to find for wicked problems. As professional decision makers, the call owners have counteracted the wicked problems. There seems to be a pattern in their solutions across funds and borders. This encompasses, among other procedures, the application forms, which have gotten more and more detailed, with mandatory time and production schedules that mostly match the outdated waterfall project design. In some cases, the call owners try to steer the application process closely, such as by matchmaking project partners. In addition, mandatory evaluation methods, designed as so-called impact measurements on the learners, insinuate a predictability. Individual learning processes are expected to take place linearly, strictly causal, and simultaneously with other learners. The required administrative documentation and the mandatory report forms can be so detailed that they can exceed by far the efforts that are undertaken for the target groups of the projects. A look at the rationales in project application processes has resulted in the insight that there is a gap. On the one hand, call owners and their evaluators follow a rationale that has materialized more and more in a kind of micromanagement. On the other hand, the rationale of the applicants has become more and more blurred by the need for the grants as an important income, while it in its origin is based on the motivation to make a positive difference for the learners. Thus, the gap is reinforced by the imbalance of power between call owners and applicants. Seen through the lens of research undertaken by Danish EDULEARN, the implementation of strategies for the education sector through projects is more and more dictated by the call owners. More open translations from both sides could promote awareness of the choices made by the call owners as well as by the applicants. The wickedness and the gap have led to different response modes to the rigid procedures in the calls for projects. Some applicants give up beforehand simply as they cannot bring in the necessary resources or the expertise. Other applicants approach the requirements either somewhat humble, fully believing in the given rules, or they professionalize their application and project by fulfilling each requirement detailed and strictly. It is interesting that some applicants seem to practice a certain disobedience by following the rules, but then supplementing or exchanging them with more sense-making methods. An open and critical dialogue with the call owners on practicable alternatives is rarely practiced. The paper aims to explore ways to align calls for innovation projects with educational practice. This requires openness to new project didactics that may not necessarily, on the one hand, match the call's steering rationale, and, on the other hand, may demand a new level of project professionalism from educational practitioners. Resilience has been examined as a possible crucial pillar in a new project didactics. Here, resilience goes beyond traditional risk management. Instead, resilience is meant to strengthen a coherent system, the project with all its stakeholders, while changes occur. This includes the acceptance of uncertainty and the readiness for continuous learning from the beginning of the project until after the ending. The acceptance of uncertainty is conditioned by trust, and there's a close interaction between trust and resilience. Trust is essential in vibrant and often turbulent environments that almost always depend on practitioners' individual performance. Teaching, guidance, and social work rely on personal responsibility from professionals. This requires an organizational social capital with trust in the professional's own choices. Thus, trust building should be incorporated in projects on different levels and practiced together with the call owners. Wicked problems in complex innovation projects with complex contexts have led to an increased rigidity in project calls, which reflect an outdated project approach. This has increased the gap between the project calls and the applications, fortified an imbalance of power, and caused several inappropriate response modes from the applicants. A focus on translations is needed. This may lead to a higher degree of transparency in order to identify, communicate, and acknowledge the authentic character of each individual project and its methods. The project calls should embrace new project didactics that employ more contemporary project approaches. These project didactics should prioritize resilience and trust, rather than relying on micromanagement, conventional risk avoidance, and misleading evaluation methods. Finally, one of the respondents to the paper added a valuable perspective. An increased trust on governance level for projects can, with a certain probability, strengthen project resilience as well.